Hi there, welcome back to our next video. I first of all want to say thank you to all the people that engaged with the last one. This is definitely new for me and I might sound a little bit awkward sometimes, but I just want to thank people for showing up anyway, and also to the people that let me know that the music wasn't very great. It was a little bit too loud. Both me and Jack didn't really notice that before we posted it. But once I listened back to it, I definitely could understand what people are on about. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. All good feedback. So anyway, this video is just going to be taking you through our weekend really, which was a very homey weekend with just some basically homey things to do. Jack's list was basically to get as much of this firewood processed as possible before his back really started to ache. And he did a good job. We got quite a bit of it done. The wood itself is Sitka, and around the farms near us there are a lot of sort of random strips and patches of Sitka. I think maybe like 40, 50 years ago there was a lot of grants going on for farmers to sort of plant parcels of their land up with Sitka plantations, I guess to make the UK a bit more self-sufficient in timber. I don't know. You can see it in the background over there right now. That's where the wood's come from. The landowner kindly gave us his permission. A lot of it's just blowing down now anyway in the wind. It's so vast and sort of not a lot to stop the wind, so they just get pulled up and they just sort of end up rotting away anyway. So it's good for us because it means that we've got a good, what would you call it? A good bout of firewood for the winter. We've still got to stack it. It's still sat there in a pile getting frosty, so that will be next weekend's job probably. It is very good having a wood stove. I think it's very needed in like sort of rural old cold houses. It's a bit of added security, so you know that if anything goes on with the power or anything like that, you're usually sort of the last on the list as well, I guess. If there is a power outage, the towns and cities are going to sort of go and be helped first. So it's good to have a stove for heat and also for something to cook on. One of my top jobs this weekend was I needed to make another batch of bone broth. Or just broth, or just stock, whatever you want to call it. I know bone broth's become quite like a trendy thing in the last few years. It really isn't though, it's literally just stock. I think there's something about stock that feels like, I think a lot of people stopped cooking with it. A lot of the younger sort of generations didn't really, we would just replace it with stock cubes and things. But obviously a stock cube doesn't have the same nutritional value, I don't believe, because or the same emotional, spiritual value. I think there's something really lovely about using up everything that you've got. You're using the bones of whatever animal you've just consumed. I like to use all the garden scraps to try and get the absolute most out of them. It's also a good one because I can put it in a lot of different dishes that I create, and my kids are none the wiser that there's actually a lot of goodness in there. So it's a win-win, and at the end of the day you can just compost it all. I like to pick out all the meat after and give it to the dog as well. He's usually hovering by the smell of it. So yeah, I got that done. I was chuffed with that. I got like a good few jars made. I did see something recently online and it really irritated me. It was someone that had this really delicious looking bone broth. It was like really sort of thick and gelatin like, and I know that might put a lot of people off, but to me I was like, ooh, that looks really good. So I clicked for the method. It's not really a recipe, but it was paywalled. It was paywalled behind like a 300, I think it was over that, it might have been nearer to $400 course on how to make broth. And I just did not understand this at all. I thought this is something that's so simple and so universal. There is no right way of doing it. And yet we're capitalising on something like that. And I totally understand the other side of the coin on this, which is that people are they're giving you a choice to pay for something that's basically a streamlined version of their own journey, their own, expertise on it. You're offering a streamlined version of this is what works, so do it this way. Whereas what I'm doing is probably like a lot of sort of just practice, really. Some batches won't be great, but then some will, and eventually I'll learn what makes the best broth. I think generally as well, we've become a little bit obsessed with streamlining everything. I've probably said that way too many times. Or with optimizing everything. And I just want to sort of put it out there that it's okay to become good at something slowly with a lot of trial and error. So I tried to make sourdough about 8 years ago, and it didn't go very well. I kept doing it, and the starter was great, but I was basically trying to make it like normal, like you would if you were using a powdered yeast. And I kept wondering, like, why is this not working? Why is the bread so dense? And it just didn't work, and I sort of gave up after a while, and I just went back to, like, if I was going to make bread, it would be just with, like, commercial yeast. And then I tried another few times, and it didn't work again, and I was a bit like, oh, come on. And then someone shared a method online, and just something about the way this woman presented the information, it was very sort of like, this doesn't have to be hard, this is very, very simple. She also sort of let everyone know this isn't like the best, most artisan loaf of bread you'll ever have, but this is an everyday sourdough. And anyway, I tried it and I got a really good loaf of bread, and ever since I have stuck to that method. So now when I make sourdough, I do not deviate, my measurements do not deviate, and I know for some people that might seem a bit like, what? But it works. And there was a lot of trial and error before that, and then as soon as I found something that worked, I've just stuck with it. And I think that's okay. Like, you don't have to become an expert in sourdough to make sourdough. You don't have to spend loads of money on a course to teach you. And I think this is true for a lot of things. I feel this way about gardening and cooking and, I don't know, maybe even parenting to some extent. Like, no one really knows what they're doing, you just have to sort of do it. I just feel like we're getting a little bit distracted sometimes at trying to become really, really like, we're trying to optimize everything and streamline everything, and I just sort of want to be a bit of resistance to that, because it's very perfectionist sort of mindset, and I don't think that always achieves much. Let alone, you know, just like general satisfaction and sort of like self-compassion and whatever you want to call it. I feel like this is one of the reasons that a lot of people start gardening, and maybe they are really excited about it, and you buy loads of seeds and you have this thing in your head, this image in your head about how it's all going to look and how you're going to harvest stuff, and then inevitably the first harvest, like maybe the seeds don't even germinate, nothing comes of any of it, and you feel really disheartened and you're like, what's the point? I feel like gardening's a really good one. It's like really good at sort of like keeping people out for that reason, but I feel like if we can override that, then we can actually enter into really, really fulfilling and rewarding practices, whether they're hobbies, whether they're lifestyles, whatever you want to call it. There's just a lot to be gained from just doing things like this. I think it's such a rewarding thing. Growing food is so rewarding. Any sort of skill that you develop, whether it's, you know, making a good broth, making bread, or, you know, and I don't know, maybe like some sort of crafty skill, like you become really good at like woodworking or whatever it is. It's just really worth persevering with it, because that's the only way. I say this to my little girl all the time when she gets really frustrated with drawing and artwork and stuff sometimes. She loves to do it, but sometimes she feels like, oh, I'm just getting it all wrong, and every single time I tell her, like, that's a good thing. Every time you make a mistake, it's really good, because now you're going to learn from that mistake. So just keep going. I might be stating the complete obvious to so many people, but I also know there is a lot of people that think, or did think, or still think, like I do, and did, and that's sort of like, what's the point in even trying if it's going to take you so long to get good at anything? Like, you know, it feels quite overwhelming, and I think a lot of the time that thought process is really a sort of very fight or flight sort of response, where you feel like you just don't have the time, and I feel like we could all do with just slowing down in our day-to-day. Anyway, I am just cutting potatoes up. I'm making a cottage pie with the potatoes from the garden, I was going to use the carrots, but you know, they were too delicious, so I had a few older carrots in the fridge. So we ended up just snacking on the carrots we picked from the garden. Because for some reason they're just a lot sweeter. I think it's because they're fresher. I think the longer that they're out, the sort of... I don't know, I think they lose the sweetness. And obviously we've got the onions out. We had a really good bounty crop of onions this year, and I was a little bit negative about it, if I'm being honest. At first, when I saw Jack putting in the onions, I questioned, why are you putting in so many onions? We only have 5 beds, and this was before we did the other beds that you could see in the last bit. The ones that we literally just turned over the grass and just stuck potatoes and carrots in. The other beds, yeah, I didn't understand why we were growing onions in them, because I thought onion is such a cheap crop in the shop. It's such a cheap vegetable. We should just use that space for something else, like, you know, beetroot or something that's going to be really expensive to buy. I was wrong about that, because onions are a fantastic thing to always have in. We use them in just everything has an onion in, right? We use them all the time. And we're making everyone's gifts homemade this year because we're on a budget. But I still want to gift things to people, and I really find it quite rewarding giving homemade things. I'm not sure everyone will appreciate them. I hope that they do. But yeah, anyway. So we're making a load of candles and we're making a load of chutney for everyone's Christmas gifts. Obviously we're making onion chutney. I'm going to make a beetroot one as well. I've yet to harvest a majority of the beetroot. I'm probably only going to do that really on the day that I am about to make the chutney, and I'm waiting on my jars being delivered. I'm also making, at the same time as making the cottage pie, with basically the same ingredients. I'm making a pumpkin soup. The pumpkin I harvested the other day. It was the one pumpkin we got from our garden. And because my children are all little fusspots, they don't eat cottage pie. Really annoyingly, right? It's so annoying when you have to make multiple variations, but it doesn't matter. You know, it's the season of life I'm in. One day they will all eat the same thing. For now, I will keep making stuff. They'll keep on being offered it. They'll keep on with the exposure of seeing it. And hopefully one day they just ask for it and they realise that actually it's pretty delicious. But my little boy is very honest about the fact that he thinks the school dinner ladies cook a lot better than I do. And I try not to take offence to that, but I'm also quite offended, if I'm being honest. Yeah, I use half of this pack of mince to make a spaghetti bolognese, because that is something that 2 out of 3 of my children religiously eat. I cook it about once a week. I know I'm not the only mother in the UK to rely on spaghetti bolognese once a week as just like a really simple, nutritious option. So yeah, so there's 3 dishes going on right now, and I really do feel tethered to the kitchen. I also sometimes really have to force myself to sort of just step outside and be like, it's okay, you've got a load to do, but you've always got time to be out on the earth and just chill. Just chill, man. Like, it's gonna be okay. When I went out to see Jack, he was like, oh, I'm just about to put some of this really rotten wood down at the bottom of the garden. And I was like, oh, okay, can I film you do it? Because I feel like that shows a really good sort of job that we do in winter. And just these little things, you know, it's not necessarily like we're gardening, but there's so many little things we can do to add just to the general ecosystem of the garden, to help all the other little creatures and organisms that are sharing the space with us. It isn't just about us getting the maximum production out of the garden. I know it's a very human sort of thing to want to try and do, though.
So while I was cutting the firewood, bit of context, these are all old Sitka spruce out of a kind of pretty failed Sitka spruce plantation. You can see where they've obviously rotted in the ground and then the wind's blown them over, so this would have been attached to the roots and now it's just sat there and rotten. Not really good for burning, so we're going to use them in the bottom bit of our garden as a little bit of kind of habitat. So against this wall is, well, south is there, so this is north facing wall. So down here doesn't get much light even in the summer. So we've just got some ferns in. These are scaly male ferns, so a native one. We've got a few astilbes, hostas, and I've stuck a couple of blackcurrant bushes in, and the hookers now get above the wall and access the sun. So this is where I put a lot of dead wood. I just kind of stack it down the bottom. No real rhyme and reason to it. And it's just for anything really that consumes dying wood, and it allows a space for things to habitat. It allows habitat for things to hibernate, and it's also, I guess, just a bit of fun really, and it gives us somewhere to look when we're doing our insect hunts. I'm not going to lie and say that this is better than having an undisturbed ecosystem, and I feel that way about insect hotels and things like that in general. It's great if you put them in, and the motivation behind it is usually quite a nice one, but we're often, if I just had piles of dead wood, then I'm really limiting what can hibernate and what can actually live here, because it's so complicated that I don't understand it. So I just try and hedge my bets and have lots of different structures and habitats.
Hedge your logs.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen toads and stuff. There's got some more rotten logs, and I do find toads and things under here. So, you know, again, it's just a way of us connecting to the land, but I'm under no illusion that this is going to save the planet or make it magically biodiverse. Yeah, I chucked some ladies' mantle that I had spare in here, and that seems to be doing okay. I've got the heuchera here as well, another kind of shade loving plant, and then again just bury bits of rotten wood that I don't really want to burn. And I try and stick some in the ground, have some as piles of logs, some are completely buried, just again so I'm hedging my bets for different things that might want to live in here.
That's the thing that's missing in gardens, isn't it? A lot of the time it's like in a natural ecosystem there's always going to be dead stuff allowed to rot down.
This looks like a good one.
Yeah.
I guess the downside of using it for insect hunts is we keep disturbing it. You know, it's not, I wouldn't suggest you daily remove it.
But it's educational for the kids. They enjoy doing it, especially in the winter where there isn't going to be much. You know that if you rummage around under these, you're going to find something.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a case like leaving it and adding to it, but not really taking away from this bit. And like I say, there's blackcurrant cuttings I've stuck in here. They've actually done, this one's done really well. If it becomes a space that's productive as well, then that'd be brilliant.
I do think generally though, people are becoming so much more aware that their gardens aren't just a space just for them. You know, we see it with, you know, birds in our gardens, insects in our gardens, you know, hedgehogs, whatever it is. I just think it's worth, rather than going against that, you know, rather than pulling up every weed, it's just good to invite them in and just try and adapt to that. It's a very good way of being with the world generally anyway. One of the things that before I got into gardening I was very interested in, this was from like an art perspective to start with, but it was weeds, and it was sort of like looking at weeds as like these radical opportunists. That's a really nice way of looking at it, because it's a very sort of anthropocentric way of viewing the world, where we're at the centre of it, and what we allow is allowed to grow and everything else should be eradicated. And once I got into that sort of thought process, and then sort of naturally got a bit more interested in herbs and things like that, you realise that everything that grows has a really amazing medicinal use, and then you realise that everything is sort of there for a reason, you know, like for instance in our garden it was a really, really dense sort of clay soil, and then it was filled with buttercups, and then you learn that, you know, the function of a buttercup and all of the really annoying roots when you're trying to weed a buttercup, it's so annoying. The roots go on forever. They just tunnel underground of these like sprawling networks of roots, and whilst that's really whilst that's really annoying and not easy to weed if you're trying to like get rid of them, they have this function in breaking up the clay and making it so other things can move in that will actually don't need to set out these sprawling industrial root systems. But I think if we can look at it in a different way, that is, these things appear where they're needed, and that is such a beautiful, almost faith-driven thing. I just wish we could understand that more. You know, the thing that's growing on your doorstep might well be the thing that you need. It might well be the medicine you need. It might well be the thing that something else needs. And when we can look at our gardens and our outdoor spaces in this way, it really just opens up the entire world. It just opens up this huge realm of possibility and interest in something that is so complex that, like Jack said earlier, we can't even really fathom, we can't even begin to understand why it's there and what its function is. But it's still a really beautiful process to witness. If you have made it this far, I thank you dearly, and I really hope that I haven't annoyed you too much with my rambling. This is all very new to me, this editing YouTube and making video thing, and it's probably going to feel a little bit awkward for a little while, so I'm going to sign off now and leave you with a minute of silence or music that I'll probably put on Make Too Loudly. Anyway, I hope everyone's having a really lovely week, and I hope that everyone's finding a few minutes to get outside and connect with the earth, be barefoot, or just breathe in the fresh air. Please subscribe if you want to see more. We do have a few more specific videos. This was just a very generalised sort of day in our weekend. Bye for now.